Hello, this is the Chord Engine mode on the disting EX. This has two similar functions, one of which is to generate a chord of output CVs from an input CV. The other is to distribute voices polyphonically from a monophonic input over an arpeggio or chord of voices. So first off, I'm going to do the chord generation mode, and then in the second video I'll cover the voice distribution because it's slightly different. So first parameter 7, operation mode, chord or distribution. So we'll stick with chord because that's what we're talking about today. You can see at the bottom of the screen the 4 notes that are being made up of the chord. These are 4 CVs are coming out of these outputs, going into these 4 voices here, which are being mixed. For the purposes of demo, I've got Rene here generating a couple of sequences clocked from a disting up here. So having selected our chord, operation mode as chord, we select harmony mode. Now there are 2 options. One is shape. The second one is SATB, soprano, alto, tenor, bass. The shape mode is basically the same as the chord generation in a bunch of other algorithms on the disting EX, so I'm not going to explore that one too much here. Suffice it to say that all the videos of the polywave table and multi-sample algorithms cover those chord generations quite well. So we'll stick with SATB. Now what this does basically is it takes the input CV and assigns it to one voice of a 4-part harmony, and then fleshes out the other voices according to normal kind of choral voice distribution techniques. So there are a couple of parameters that define exactly that. So I guess let's just turn on some sound so you can hear immediately what it's doing. And why don't we run the Rene? So there we go. So at the moment I've just got all these voices with their gain turned up so that they're droning constantly. We'll get to triggering them and things like that later on, but at the moment if we want to hear them we just need to turn them all up. So that's why I'm flipping them all on and off in the mixer. So taking a tangent for a moment, one of the things that's not great about having 4 analog voices to deal with is that you have to tune them all up. Now this algorithm contains a tuning procedure similar to that in our Silent Wave software or the FH2 module, which can automatically calibrate the output so you don't have to individually tune all these voices. So you'll end up with some nice in-tune chords. So we'll just quickly do that. Use this little mult so we can actually hear what we're doing. Output 1, voice 1, sorry, into input 5, which is the calibration input. And then from the menus we go Chord Engine, Calibration, Calibrate, Output 1. And we get that, which is good. And then we'll repeat for the other 3 voices. So voice 2. And voice 3. And finally voice 4. That's a bit of a jaggy line, let's do that again. There we go. So that's it, that's our 4 voices calibrated. So now, if we listen to them, we've got a nice in-tune chord. Okay. So, having selected our harmony mode as SATB, there are a number of parameters that define the exact notes we get from the input CV. First, obviously, is the key we're working in. We're working in C at the moment. We work in D, we'll get different notes. We'll get an F sharp there instead of the G we had before. We'll stick in C for now. Scale, major, minor, and so on. We'll stick with major for now. Chord shape and inversion and the custom chord parameters is to do with the shape mode of chord generation, so we'll skip those for now. Now, root degree, this is one of the SATB mode parameters. So, given our CV, actually I'm going to skip ahead to this parameter, cantus firmus. That tells us which voice is going to be assigned that exact pitch that's coming through. So it's kind of the melody, if you like, the one that's not going to be changed. At the moment it's set to tenor, so alto or soprano, or bass in fact. Normally, I don't know, I can say normally, but I'd find soprano is a good choice. So that basically means the voice that you've sequenced is going to be your top voice, which is often the lead or the melody in say a choral arrangement. And then stepping back, so the way it builds up the chord is given the cantus firmus, the defined pitch from here, it's going to find the nearest notes within a triad if it can, and the root degree is going to basically give us the bass note of that triad that it's going to try and fit to. So at the moment it's set to degree 1, which in the key of C is a C, so the bass is droning on C. If I change that to 2, then we're now on a D triad in the key of C, so that's D, F, A, E, F, G, A, B. So you get the different triads, but keeping the same melody note. And if I set the sequence running, you can hear the harmonisation a bit more interestingly. Okay, so that's with the root continually on C and D. So you can hear it's the same melody, but in a different triad position. And of course this is great with twiddling the knob, but what you would really like is for that to come from a CV, and indeed you can do that. If you set the root degree to from CV, then our input 1 is now a CV input, which I've got coming from the René again on the Y sequence, which I'll plug in here. So here now the root is coming from this sequence on the René. And so on. So you get the idea. So that's where you can actually start composing some kind of arrangement, I suppose. So I'll just leave that running. Cantus firmus I mentioned. So at the moment the soprano is basically taking the melody voice, but we can change that to alto or tenor. Obviously everything's getting higher as I do this, because if the tenor is the pitch CV you're giving it, then the alto and the soprano need to be above that, so the voices tend to go higher. Or if we give it the bass, then that's kind of unusual, because really you want the bass to come from the triad root, but it still works. Let's go back to alto. Let's go back to alto. And then the position. So we're here in close position at the moment. That basically means, given the notes of the triad available, the 4 voices are as close together as they can be. Change it to open position. Then basically the alto takes what would have been the tenor voice, and the tenor drops down below that again, and everything is a bit more spaced out. The two are just two versions of the same chord, but give you a different kind of sound. These parameters, when you start moving over slightly more large sequences than we've got going here, you can find that the bass drops basically out of a useful range, either too low or too high. So these two parameters let you constrain the bass to a realistic range of pitches for the bass. And then one to arpeggio mode. So yeah, I guess possibly worth emphasizing, because of the way this works, these four voices are always bass, tenor, alto, soprano. So if you want different sounds for them, then that's fine. So for example, you might want to make your, let's change the soprano to be the cantus firmus, and then we can have the different sound. And then maybe we want the bass to have a different sound too. Anyway, let's just stop that for a moment and turn them off so we don't go steadily mad. What else is there to talk about? So we'll skip over arpeggio. Scala, MTS, we can have all this tuned to microtonal scales. At the moment it's just using equal temperament. If we choose a scale and a keyboard map, then we can have things in an equal tempered scale, or in not equal tempered, adjust scale, or microtonal scales. It's quite interesting actually. Let's stick for just intonation for now. Now there are some kind of utility parameters. Input transpose basically just applies a transposition to the input CV. If, for example, you want to play a keyboard in C and have it pretend it's in D, you can do that. Tune is just a fine tune on that input CV. Output transpose, this is literally just a transpose. It doesn't do anything clever with chords, it just moves CVs up and down. So if your VCOs, for example, work in different octaves than this one is, you can move it up and down, or you can just move it about. And similarly, output tune. It's just a tune on the whole thing. Useful if you need it. Now, slew. Each voice has possibly its own slew, or they can use the same slew. So let's slow that down a bit. Put some slew. So by default they all share the same slew. See that another says same as 1. But for example, what if you wanted just the lead voice to slew? So then you could put that back to 0 and then choose voice 4. So now our soprano voice is slewing, but the other ones aren't. So that's there if you need it. Note tracking. At the moment it's set to continuous, so that basically means whenever the CV changes from René, it's going to generate a new note. Other options include triggered, so now it's only going to do it when it gets a gate. I should just mention you can hear the notes still changing because it's still getting the root note CV, so we'll just unplug that for now. So if we give it a gate from René, we'll notice in the input key now it says gate is on input 4. So there we go, so that's our gates. So in fact, if we do that, we can punch out notes now in our sequence. So that's triggered note tracking, and that's the only option. So let's just put it back to continuous for now. And similarly, root tracking. Continuous means whenever it gets a different CV on the root, it's going to change the root. Triggered is the similar, so now we've noticed we've got root gate as an input there on input 3. So if I took a cable from the Y gate on Rene and put that into input 3, then I've got the root changing based on the gates from Rene. Other options for root tracking are trigger with note. So that basically means whenever the note is triggered, the sampling of the root is also triggered, or when note changes, which basically means not when the note is triggered, but when the note changes. So it might be triggered and not change, for example, if it's the same CV. So that means the root can only change when the note changes. Again, we'll put that back to continuous for now. And then chord tracking. So basically, although there are no predefined CVs for the chord shape and such like, and the SATB parameters, if you've got those set up with CV mappings, so you've got a CV driving the open or closed position, say, if it's in the default continuous, then those will apply immediately. If you set the chord tracking to triggered, then we've now got a chord gate input, which means that it will only update the chord parameters when it gets a gate, or similarly with note, or when note changes. So this lets you limit when the chord shape actually changes if you're automating it. But we'll put that back to continuous. Output gate mode. Right, now, gates. This is where it gets quite interesting, because here we're using the ES5 as an expander for the disting EX. Now you might have noticed these lights flashing when we've been running the sequence. This lets us have per voice gates and triggers, rather than just having this constant drone we've got at the moment. So let's put all those down, and then we'll rig up some triggers. So it's the 4 voices in order, as you'd expect. So if I put that one in there and then give it a gate into this voice, then it's now actually triggering that voice. If I stop my sequence, it stops. So if I just plug in the other 4, then we've got voices being triggered. Now, yeah, so that's great, because now things start and stop. Now there are various options for this. Now at the moment it's just triggers when the note changes. If I change it to inverted triggers, then they're basically, if I just unplug that so you can see the light, they're basically generally on, but when the note changes they go low to let the envelope restart. So that means you can have the sustain going, but it still knows to restart the envelope at the start of a note. And the other one is gates. Now in this mode, we have a gate input again. So that's going to take the gate, and then it's going to use that gate and pass it to all the voices when it wants to play a note on them. So obviously the gate from Rene has a 50% pulse width, so that's the notes are now quite short. There we go. So that's your options for the output gates mode. I'm going to leave it on inverse triggers, because that basically means you get a constant sound. Input is 12 tet. This you want to leave on. Basically that's saying if you're using a microtonal scale with Scala or MTS, it's saying the input is always 12 tet, which if you're using a Eurorack sequencer like Rene, you've probably got an equal tempered 12 tone equal temperament CV input to choose the notes of the scale, and then the disting's going to use the microtonal tuning to generate the outputs. If somehow you've already got a microtonal CV sequenced that you want to give as an input to this algorithm, then you change that to what? 0. But let's leave that as 1. The gate offset parameter is similar to that in the other disting EX algorithms that have CV and gate inputs. It lets you delay the gate to allow the pitch to settle before it's sampled and used. Some sequences that generate pitch and gate generate their gate a little bit early before the pitch is stable, and this lets you delay that there. And that's the arpeggiator, so we'll skip that. So basically that's our lot for chord generation, and in the next video we'll talk about voice distribution and arpeggiation.